Dr. Jack Mayer. Dr. Jack Mayer is a Vermont writer and pediatrician. He was the first pediatric practice in Eastern Franklin County on the Canadian border, where he began writing essays, poems, and short stories about his practice and hiking Vermont's Long Trail. He was a country doctor for 10 years, often bartering medical care for eggs, firewood, and knitted Afghans. From 1987 to 1991, Dr. Mayer was the National Cancer Institute Fellow at Columbia University, researching the molecular biology of cancer. Dr. Mayer established Rainbow Pediatrics in Middlebury, Vermont in 1991, where he continues to practice primary care pediatrics. He is an instructor in pediatrics at the University of Vermont School of Medicine and an adjunct faculty for the pre-medical students at Middlebury College. He was a participant in the Bread Loaves Writers Conference in 2003 and 2005 for fiction and 2008 for poetry. His first nonfiction book, Life in a Jar, the Irina Sendler Project. His new book, Before the Court of Heaven, historical fiction about the rise of Nazism, has received 14 book awards. His collection of poems, Inspired and Composed in the Wilderness, Poems from the Wilderness, won the 2019 Proverse International Literacy Prize. So I bring to you Mr. Dr. Jack Mayer.
Thank you. And what a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the GMC Burlington section for the invitation, and my special thanks to Brian, Neil, and Jonathan to put this program together. And I also want to thank the numerous volunteers for the GMC, and I'm sure I have met many of you on the trail over the years. And you are the folks that keep Vermont's wilderness trails unobstructed and flowing like the gorgeous river that it is on which we navigate. I also just a shout out to my publisher, Jillian Bickley, who may be on this Zoom presentation as well. If you are, hello, Jillian. She's in Hong Kong. So it's very early Sunday morning there, I suspect. And my appreciation for her assistance and encouragement. So I want to append an epigraph to my remarks today, which is by the American poet Gary Snyder, who has been called the Poet Laureate of Deep Ecology. He's a winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry and the American Book Award. And he said, "Nature is not a place, it is home." So I want to start by just thinking about how we have looked at the various the spectrum of lenses that we've looked at the natural world and wilderness through. Historically, we have the biblical construct of man's dominion over nature and over the earth. And that gave way to the concept of stewardship, and I associate that with Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir. And finally, now we're in that more highly evolved notion of wilderness as a partnership, someplace where we celebrate and participate in biodiversity and interdependence. So I think we've made some interesting progress over the millennia. There are various lenses through which we look at wilderness. One is the lens of our imagination, and this sort of gets to the heart of what inspired me to put this collection together. All of these poems in the collection were poems that I composed on the trail, solo hiking. And it's the Long Trail and the Appalachian Trail largely. And it's been an exercise in mindfulness to me. And there's something about solo hiking, and I'm sure you have all experienced this yourself, that when I'm hiking with friends or with my son, which I frequently do, it's a very different experience. There's it's a cognitive experience. It's a disrupted experience with talking and with a lack of focus on just being mindful. So there is something special about solo hiking, and when I keep a notepad in my pocket of my hiking pants, and I'm just writing a poem as I am walking, and then I leave that poem at whichever shelter I'm staying at, and it's a first draft of the poem, and it's in the shelter book, so they are piling up. Um, the other lens of our imagination in the wilderness is metaphor, is the wilderness as metaphor, and just even something as simple as the trail names that we take on, and being at the mercy of the natural world, being closer to our original feral natures, and being more like the other creatures on the earth. And then finally, there's this lens of well-being, and there's this concept of the wilderness effect, which is something that's fascinating for me, both as a hiker and as a physician. We can define this wilderness effect as the beneficial effects that exposure to the natural world has on health, reducing stress, restoring attention, and promoting physical, emotional, and psychological well-being and healing. A lot of this research into this wilderness effect began in the 1970s. Initially people thought, oh, it takes a couple of days, 2 or 3 days of being immersed in wilderness in order to start experiencing this wilderness effect. But as more research has been done and as it continues to be done, it's pretty clear that it doesn't take very much, that even a couple of hours a week can make a demonstrable difference in some physiologic parameters. So for physical health, for cognitive function, nature really is essential. The evidence that we have that continues to increase is that nature is an antidote to stress. It can lower blood pressure, it lowers stress hormone levels, reduces central nervous system arousal. It enhances the immune system's function and increases our sense of self-esteem, reduces anxiety, and improves mood. I have started prescribing nature to my patients, and this is it hopefully will become a routine part of the delivery of healthcare by a diverse group of healthcare professionals. I think of the forest as another therapist. And if we allow it to, it can help us engage all of our senses, and we can really experience a deep and immersive form of interaction with nature. Rachel and Stephen Kaplan are 2 professors of psychology at the University of Michigan. They began studying this concept of environmental psychology back in the 70s. And they have done a prodigious amount of research on the nature of people's relationships to wilderness and health and well-being. They talk about restorative environments and attention restoration theory, how we view our relationships with nature. And they have really influenced 2 generations of environmental psychologists and architects and city planners and urban planners and designers. And one of the interesting things that they have illuminated is this notion of a balance of attention. The Kaplans have found in their research that too much focused attention on anything will eventually leads to mental fatigue. This is well known. And that one remedy for this is in exposure to nature, even brief exposure to nature, so that even office workers with a view of a natural setting outside their window experience the benefits of that exposure. It lifts people's moods. It enhances their ability to mentally focus. The Japanese have an interesting take on this. Japanese researchers they refer to something called forest bathing, or shinrin-yoku, which is bathing in the forest atmosphere. It's taking in the forest through our senses. It is simply being in nature and connecting with nature through our 5 senses, through sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. Shinrin-yoku, they describe it as a bridge. It's one mechanism that they hypothesize is that aerosols from the forest inhaled during walking and hiking are behind elevated levels of natural killer cells in the immune system. And these are lymphocytes that fight tumors and infections. Climate change has become a main subject of anxiety in many people, and there's one of the best antidotes for that might be, again, a dose of green space. Now in our COVID pandemic, certainly as we see so many more people availing themselves of outdoor experiences, this is a respite from both the COVID-19, from politics, from personal pain and stress. So the collection of these poems, and this is the book, the cover of the book, and I'm glad to note that Justin and Kelly Goodhart are on this Zoom call. Justin took the cover photo for my book. It's moonrise over the West Mountain Shelter in the Appalachian Trail. This is New York State. But thank you, Justin. A beautiful photograph and a beautiful photographer. So I'm going to read a little bit from some of these poems, and with a little explanation. I want to start with a poem that's called "A Boy is Missing," and this really is. I'm going back to my first introduction to hiking as a child when I was 8 years old. I grew up in New York City. I lived in a housing project. We didn't have a car, but my uncle had a car, and he went hiking in the Catskill Mountains. And he would take me along, and I very quickly fell in love with the outdoors, with the wilderness. So this is my perspective on that boy from many decades later. A boy is missing. A boy is missing. I'm on his trail. There is no alarm clock to wake me, to propel me by internal combustion over asphalt, sidewalks, deadlines, into my extinct future. Only a faint trail, white blazes, suggesting north or south, or sanctuary, the next water source, last year's leaf mulch. The boy I'm tracking down, the boy whose trail I follow, has been missing for so long that I scarcely remember his favorite flannel shirt, his buck teeth and Brill-Cream's stiff hair. Mile by mile, I draw closer, glimpse him through autumn foliage. My hands and face are unwashed. I carry soil into my tent with neither worry nor culpability, and sleep the phantasmagorical sleep of one newly born or one who has passed over. Don't call me, there is no phone. Don't send me to bed, there is no bed. Don't fill my plate with boiled Brussels sprouts or illusions I must swallow if I want dessert. I won't ever find that missing boy, but searching unbundles my soul. So I'd like to bookend that poem with a poem called Gratitude, which, oh, by the way, that last poem, A Boy is Missing, that I left that at the Clarendon shelter. This one is also at the Clarendon shelter, and it's from the other end, a perspective from the other end of a life of being in the wilderness. Gratitude. Thank you, wilderness, my old friend, who upon reunion after my year-long absence asks for nothing and gives everything. When we first met, I knew you like a brother. I was 8, you were 3.8 billion. It was my first hike with Uncle Eric and his dachshund Bijou in the Catskill Mountains. In my early 20s, besotted with you, Zealously adolescent, I nearly froze to death snow camping in the high Sierra near Donner Pass. We have grown closer and older, you and I. You have held me as I slept in my mummy sack. My hiking sticks, once ornamental, are now essential. The sheer tonnage I have hauled to be near you has lightened with miracle fibers. The trail has become my enduring house of worship, stained glass foliage praising forest saints. I am penitent about the privies we humans have built along our pilgrimage route, clumsy, crude confessionals for a communion of sort. Someday soon we'll share a park bench, you and I, on a sunny autumn day. Tears will blur because soon I will leave you and I will say thank you again. This next poem, which is I left this at the Battelle shelter. And it's a tribute to my hiking boots. And I both appreciate my footwear and I take it for granted. So parting with an old and tired pair of boots makes me mindful of my debt of gratitude. So this is both a tribute and a eulogy. Boots. You must let go of old boots when the soul separates from the body. Mourn the many miles, the weariness and exaltation. These new boots are not yet mine. They have barely 6 miles on them. So far, so good, no hot spots. I'm still learning how they grip or slip on wet rocks. My old boots sit outside with the trash. I think I'll bury them and mark the grave, or plant forget-me-nots in them for one last season. Old friends who have carried me to the lap of God and back. In the same vein of celebrating those things that allow us to be in the wilderness, some of you probably know what a Svea stove is, and maybe some of you have had Svea stoves. It was a little Swedish, brilliantly engineered, small, lightweight cooking stove. Mine was the Svea 123, and it was my pal for 40 years easily. And then on one hiking trip, it just blew up. And if you know the Svea stove, you pour gasoline on the outside of it, light that on fire so that the heat that's generated then causes the white gas on the inside to become gas. So this is in memoriam Svea camp stove. This is I left this at the shelter, the Suckerbrook shelter. It rained hard yesterday at Middlebury Gap. Deep footprints in the mud will soon enough disappear. The ridge line is enchanted with morning mist, pines blurred by fog. My old friend died last night, my Svea camp stove, whom I have lit for 40 years. She perished in explosive flames. Svea and I have had good times, snow camping in the high Sierras with my girlfriend, our hot bodies warming us, our kisses desperate in the valley of death. Svea and I have had bad times, snow camping in the high Sierras with my girlfriend near Donner Pass, where snow-bound starving humans in 1846 cannibalized each other in desperation. We almost died of hypothermia and exhaustion when Svea was new and I was 20-something. She was brass-plated like gold. I was always glad to see her before a camping trip or just winking at me for no reason from her basement shelf. Maybe there are but a few years left for me to leave a footprint in the wilderness, I shall miss it as much as breathing. I'll keep dearly departed Svea on that shelf, like an urn holding cremated ashes, and we'll wink at each other, my companion in the wilderness or the basement darkness. So I had mentioned trail names before, and most wilderness hikers adopt a trail name, a trail identity. It's something that's chosen. They're funny, they're poignant, they're profound, they're metaphorical, they're weird, they're ridiculous, they're it's always a pleasure to read the shelter books and the diversity of the various personalities that come through. And I think it's as metaphor, it is a way of honoring the quote unquote otherness of wilderness, the other dimension of our personalities. So we relinquish our given names and we take a trail name. It's a sort of a pen name or a nom de plume, an identity that we can put on, take off, change at any time. So this is trail names. And I left this at the David Logan shelter. Near as I can tell, no one reads these poems, which is just as well. I am free to hand scribe each one like a scruffy, sweaty monk in service to sanctity. I imagine my poems stacked like cordwood in the Long Trail warehouse with every shelter journal, every trail name. Rusted Root has through hiked the long Appalachian and Pacific Crest trails, mostly alone. He points to his pack. Tina Turner, sometimes I get lonely. Mops and Pops have run 76 marathons. They're pushing 60. Mops binds her feet with duct tape. Pops's stories are all about running. Lydia and Nathan went to grade school together. Still in high school, Lydia says she's waiting for her trail name. Nathan is Scooter, but the dreadlocked boy smiles sweetly and says, I'm not Scooter anymore. How curious to carry so many names. Dad, Doc, Honey, Mountain Poet, Pilgrim. We dare to choose our trail names, dare to hike our long trail, leaving our old names behind. This is from, I left this poem is called Shooting Star. I left it at Shooting Star Shelter, the first shelter on the northern end of the trail. Shooting Star, late August. I try to imagine the summer forest snow shrouded. My son empties muddy water from his boots. I wring rain from my bandana. Shooting Star Shelter, perched on a broad mantle of granite, open to the galaxy, to flaming bits of cosmic dust. It rained so hard last night, I thought meteor fragments pelted the tin roof. The Shelter Journal, a student's composition book, invites me from its small writing table bolted to the wall. This anthology, full as a squirrel's nest, full as the Milky Way, each entry a meteorite, effervescent and irreverent, a message to fellow travelers, a flaming footnote in eternity. So I'm really aware as I'm hiking of and fascinated by erratics, these giant boulders that were deposited by the last glacial ice age, and it tends to give me a perspective that is humbling and correcting. So this is this is a poem. I left this at Sterling Pond Shelter. And maybe some of you know Overhanging Rock, which is one great big erratic right on the trail. So it's called Erratic. Overhanging rock, an erratic left behind by the glacier, hangs precariously over the long trail between bare hollow and white-faced shelters. Trees root on its roof. It was most apt to collapse the day it was deposited here, 10,000 years ago, give or take. Overhanging rock may give way today, but I'll eat my lunch under its mossy shelter. So when I put the book together, I also had sections in it that are related to spiritual feelings that have become writ large for me in on the trail, and what I'm going to read now is this is a poem that was actually inspired by my bird feeder, and birds in general. But this is, it's called I Am a God to the Birds. I am a god to the birds, flocking to my feeder in winter, a forgiving God who, when winter winds bite and summer's bounty is frozen, miraculously provides fishes and loaves, sunflower seeds and suet in exchange for their beauty, their bickering, their blessing. They cannot know how I praise them through the glass, astounded that they can fly and I cannot. That for them, fear is so ordinary, so transcendent, that they proclaim the glory. When the winter of my soul chills, when the fruits of summer are exhausted, I turn to holy books to peck at their words for seeds of truth, for sustenance, for exaltation. I revel in the mystery, the prayer that a God behind the window loves me enough to feed my soul. So one other dimension of sort of my life has been my growing investment and involvement with hospice, and I'm a singer. I sing with the Wellspring Hospice chorus in Middlebury, and we attend at the bedside as people are passing over and sing for hospice patients. For me, the notion of hospice is really another wilderness experience and a wilderness question that has been one of both fascination and curiosity. So that the end of life bears many of those invitations to step onto wilderness trails in some way. So that when we sing as in the Wellspring chorus, we are singing people over. They're in the process of actively dying, and we are singing to them. I sing bass, and so this is from one experience of singing at a bedside, and this poem is called "Singing Over." He nears the end of this journey, preparing for the next, breathing coarse, intermittent, body tranquil but for fitful breath. We stand in a semicircle and sing a hymn, cocoon a man we know because he is one of us, and do not know because he approaches the boundary. Small voices in four-part harmony fill the dying room, a choir, suffusing Renaissance heights. I know my part well enough to be present to the mystery, to see myself in his place, to both give and receive this comfort synchronously. Grace made visible, audible, palpable. So I want to leave time for questions, comments, other things. This has gone on for about half an hour, so I think we'll just open this up for conversation. Oh, and someone chatted. Mark Turner chatted about he still has a working Svea stove. Good on you. Be careful, it's gonna blow up one day.
There it is. There it is.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
There it
Okay.
is.
Well, should have brought mine up from the basement. Yeah.
And the Sig Tourist cook set that it goes in.
Yes. Yes.
I still use it. It's great stuff.
It is.
All right, I have a question from Nancy. It says Nancy to everyone, but what is your trail name?
My trail name is Mountain Poet.
Mountain Poet.
So
And when did you get your trail name?
Oh dear, probably 30 years ago, and it hasn't changed.
Okay. Ted, what are some other trail names you used in your writing?
Oh, no, none other. No.
Oh, always Mountain Poet.
Yeah, that's it. So I started writing poetry in earnest. I mean, I've been writing ever since I was in elementary school. It's been my Jones is to write. But when I started my first practice up on the Canadian border in Franklin County, I started writing about my patients, and that was about my. I was in a solo pediatric practice up there. There'd never been one before. It was a challenging, very challenging practice, and maybe I included one of those doctor poems in the collection, and if you'll indulge me, I'll read this. It's a house call on the. It's called Blood, a house call on the Canadian border. And so this is from like the 1970s, the late 70s, maybe early 80s. I don't even have a date on this, but that's when it would have been. And this particular house call was in the town of Richford, which is right on where I had two offices, one in Enosburg Falls and one in Richford. Blood. After 3 days hard snow, this border town is ominously picturesque. My snow boots break a path to 7-year-old Rodney, who lives in the Charbonneau trailer, completely drifted over on Troy Street. The Alberta Clippers' Arctic blast across the Canadian border whips my face, whips windows wrapped in plastic, scatters heat like feathers shook loose from geese too lame to migrate. The steel of my stethoscope is a shock on Rodney's chest. His blue-rimmed eyes widen, his breath sucks in and in again. I search for shine in his too heavy eyes. What does Rodney know of radiance? Through my black stethoscope, polar winds search empty caves for blood. I must believe that his heart still pumps the energy of creation. Possibility still suffuses the capillary network of his dreams. But Rodney wears sneakers in the snow and sleeps beside the gas stove that bakes warmth all night to save on fuel oil. He'll grow a few more winters and lose his one-eyed teddy bear. School is canceled, the street muffled by snow until it melts.
Okay, there's a few other questions on here. Have you returned to the Catskills to hike?
You know, I haven't been back to the Catskills since I was a boy. And if any of you are hikers in the Catskills, you might, there's a trail that's called Deutsche Ecke, which is the German corner. And I hiked frequently at Deutsche Ecke, and I long to go back there and retrace my steps and wonder what it looks like to me as an adult now.
A similar question. Did you have a trail name as a young boy when you hiked with your uncle?
I had no idea that anybody had a trail name. It was a completely new experience to me. I didn't have hiking boots. I hiked in sneakers, and it was different world.
Another question: are the wilderness effect benefits independent of those of exercise or synergistic with them?
That's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer, but I think that some research is carried out where the control group is people who are hiking in groups or in where there is distraction, where they're not completely immersed in the wilderness experience. But I can't speak more to that.
Confounded at this point, not known.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The poems you left at shelters, did you sign them with your trail name?
I do. I signed them with my trail name, and not my regular name. I refer to that as guerrilla poetry.
Guerrilla. All right. One more question here. What I love about nature is how it is disorderly compared to the built environment. The chaos is what is magical about it to me. Any thoughts?
I think that gets back to that notion of reintegrating it into an experience that is sort of long buried in our past history of when we were the feral animals of the woods, along with every other species. So that I don't think those traces have disappeared. I think we carry them in some fundamental metaphysical way within us. So yeah, so I think there is that primitiveness and that crudeness and I think it's why I like becoming what I call camperized after a couple of days on the trail, where you're dirty and your fingernails have dirt on them, and your clothes are starting to smell a little rank, and it is a completely immersive experience in what I think of as an ages, eons old characteristic that we carry, how we carry wilderness with us, because most of human history is in the wilderness. We are the new experiment, and we haven't been going very long or necessarily very well. So yes, I think we carry that with us in a profound way, I think. And I think it gets submerged. I think this is, it's like when we're on the trail is when we're invited to become to become one again with that ancient wisdom and that ancient experience and that ancient formulation of us as an interdependent species with every other living organism.
All right, excellent. Any other questions? Last chance here to get your questions out to Jack. All right, I'm not seeing any. So again, Jack, I'd like to thank you for your excellent presentation tonight. And I think Echo, especially with all of the questions that came in, very engaging. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'll see you.
Thank you for coming in on the
Look
chat
forward to
here.
seeing you on the trail.
All right, I'll see you on the trail. All right, do you want to say a few words there, President Jonathan?
Thanks, Brian. Thank you very much, Jack. Really appreciated your presentation tonight. And for me personally, honestly, the first poem you read really kind of hit home. It was really